The morning mist clung to Pentonville Prison like a burial shroud, seeping through the Victorian stonework that had witnessed a century of human misery. Thomas Harwick's boots echoed against the damp corridor floor, each step a percussion of authority that announced his arrival to the cowering inmates. February 1952 had brought an unusual chill to London, but nothing compared to the ice that had formed around Harwick's heart since returning from the war. "Morning rounds," he barked to the junior guard, Patterson, who fumbled with his keys. "Start with the solitary wing." Cell 7 housed their most peculiar prisoner. Number 47, as he was known in the records, had arrived 6 months prior under circumstances that even the warden wouldn't discuss. The elderly man, perhaps 70 years of age, possessed a bearing that seemed utterly incongruous with his surroundings. His silver hair, though unkempt, retained a certain distinction, and his pale blue eyes held depths that Harwick found inexplicably unsettling. "On your feet, 47!" Harwick commanded, striking his baton against the iron bars. The old man rose slowly from his thin mattress, his movements deliberate and measured, never hurried despite Harwick's threatening posture. This graceful defiance infuriated the guard more than any explicit rebellion could have. "You think you're special, don't you?" Harwick sneered, entering the cell. "Some toff who ended up on the wrong side of the law. Well, in here you're nothing, less than nothing." The prisoner remained silent as he always did, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the cell walls. This silence had become his signature, more eloquent than any protest. Other inmates screamed, begged, or fought back. Number 47 simply endured, and somehow that made Harwick's cruelty feel small. The guard knocked the prisoner's meager breakfast, a bowl of watery porridge, onto the floor with his baton. "Clumsy me," he said with mock concern. "Looks like you'll be eating off the ground again, where you belong." As the old man slowly knelt to salvage what he could of his meal, Harwick noticed how his hands trembled, not from fear, but from hunger and cold. The prisoner's fingers, refined and delicate despite the dirt beneath his nails, suggested a life once lived far from these walls. Perhaps he had played piano or held a pen to write important documents. Now those same hands scraped porridge from stone. "My daughter's sick," Harwick said suddenly, unsure why he felt compelled to share this. "Tuberculosis. Doctors say she needs expensive treatment. Meanwhile, traitors like you get 3 meals a day on the taxpayer's shilling." For the first time, number 47 looked directly at him. In those pale eyes, Harwick saw not defiance or hatred, but something far more disturbing: compassion. The old man's lips moved slightly, as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, he simply nodded, a gesture so full of genuine understanding that Harwick struck him across the face with the back of his hand. "Don't you dare pity me," the guard snarled, watching as blood trickled from the prisoner's split lip. "You know nothing about sacrifice, nothing about loss." But even as he stormed from the cell, Harwick couldn't shake the feeling that number 47 knew far more about both than anyone suspected. The other guards whispered about him sometimes, about how he helped fellow inmates with their letters, despite never writing any of his own, how he seemed to understand every language spoken in the prison yard, how even the most violent criminals showed him an odd respect. That night, Harwick stood outside his daughter Emily's room, listening to her labored breathing, 8 years old and fighting for every breath. The unfairness of it all, that she should suffer while criminals lived, made his hands clench into fists. Tomorrow, he decided, he would make number 47 understand what real suffering meant. The following weeks brought a systematic escalation of Harwick's cruelty. He assigned number 47 to the worst work details, ensuring the elderly man spent hours in the freezing courtyard breaking rocks despite his obvious frailty. Yet each evening, when other prisoners collapsed from exhaustion, the old man would help them to their cells, sharing his already meager water ration with those who needed it more. "You're not some bleeding saint," Harwick spat one afternoon, finding number 47 tending to a young inmate who'd been beaten by other prisoners. The old man had torn strips from his own threadbare shirt to bandage the boy's wounds. Heroes don't end up in Pentonville for treason. The word treason always elicited a subtle change in the prisoner's expression. Not shame, but something closer to profound sadness. Patterson, the younger guard, had once tried to access number 47's full records, but found them sealed with military classification stamps he'd never seen before. "It's like he doesn't officially exist," Patterson had whispered to Harwick, "just that he's here indefinitely for crimes against the Crown." March arrived with unexpected warmth, and with it came a fever that swept through the prison. The infirmary overflowed, and inmates lay groaning in their cells. Number 47, despite his age, seemed oddly resistant to the illness. More remarkably, Harwick observed him moving from cell to cell during the night, somehow having figured out how to pick the ancient locks with a piece of wire. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Harwick demanded, catching him kneeling beside a delirious prisoner. The old man looked up and for the second time spoke, though only in a whisper so soft Harwick had to lean in to hear. "This man has a wife, 3 children. He needs water or he won't survive the night." The voice was cultured, refined, with an accent that belonged in Parliament rather than prison. Before Harwick could respond, the old man had returned to his silent ministry, using his own water ration to cool the fever of others. "Lock him in solitary," Harwick ordered Patterson the next morning. 3 days, no water except the minimum. Let's see how generous he feels then. But isolation seemed to affect number 47 differently than other prisoners. Through the small window, Harwick saw him performing what looked like military calisthenics, maintaining his strength with practiced discipline. Sometimes he would stand at perfect attention for hours, as if on guard duty, visible only to him. Once, Harwick swore he heard him humming what sounded like a regimental march. On the 3rd night of solitary, Harwick's world shifted. He'd been walking the late rounds when a stabbing pain in his chest dropped him to his knees. His vision blurred, his breath came in gasps. Heart attack, he thought with stark clarity. Emily would be orphaned. As darkness crept in from the edges of his vision, he heard the unmistakable sound of a cell door opening. Number 47 knelt beside him, those refined hands working with surprising expertise. The old man loosened Harwick's collar, positioned him carefully, and began performing a medical technique Harwick didn't recognize. Rhythmic pressure on specific points that somehow eased the crushing pain in his chest. All the while, number 47 spoke in that cultured whisper. "Steady breaths, Thomas. Think of Emily. She needs you to fight." How did he know his daughter's name? How had he escaped solitary? But more importantly, why was he helping the man who had tormented him daily? When Patterson found them 20 minutes later, Harwick was stable, and number 47 was back in his solitary cell, door locked as if he'd never left. The younger guard looked between them in confusion. "Sir, should I call the medic?" "Yes," Harwick croaked, staring at the old man through the bars. Number 47 simply nodded once, then turned away, returning to his silent vigil. Harwick returned to duty after a week's forced medical leave, but something fundamental had changed. He found himself watching number 47 differently, noting details he'd previously ignored. The way the prisoner's hands moved when he slept, as if writing invisible letters in the air. The faded tattoo on his inner wrist that looked military, but from no unit Harwick recognized. The way he stood during the national anthem at the King's birthday celebration, not with the slouch of a traitor, but at perfect attention with tears in his eyes. "Why did you help me?" Harwick finally asked during a quiet moment in the yard. They were alone, other prisoners giving them a wide berth as always. Number 47 continued breaking rocks, his rhythm steady despite his obvious exhaustion. "You have a daughter who needs you," he said simply, his voice still barely above a whisper. "Children shouldn't lose their fathers to wars they didn't start. The war's been over for 7 years. Has it?" The old man's eyes met his. "You still fight it every night, don't you, Thomas? I can see it in how you walk, how you flinch at sudden sounds. North Africa, Italy." Harwick's jaw tightened. "Normandy, then Belgium. Lost my unit at Bastogne. He didn't know why he was sharing this with a prisoner, especially this prisoner. My brother was in intelligence. Disappeared behind enemy lines in 44. Never found out what happened to him. Something flickered across number 47's face. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. William Harwick, he said softly. Royal Intelligence Corps. Good man. Brave man. The guard's blood turned cold. How could you possibly know that? But number 47 had returned to his stones, the conversation clearly over. That night, Harwick pulled his brother's last letter from the box under his bed. William had written about a mission, something vital but classified. The last line haunted him still. If something happens to me, know that I'm with the best of men, men who sacrifice everything and ask for nothing in return. April brought unexpected visitors to Pentonville, military vehicles, the kind Harwick recognized from his service days. High-ranking officials who whispered urgently with the warden. Through his office window, Harwick watched them inspect the prison records, particularly focused on the solitary wing. They're asking about number 47, Patterson reported nervously. Want to know about his health, his treatment, if he's said anything? That afternoon, a colonel named Morrison pulled Harwick aside. The prisoner in cell 7, he said carefully. Has he mentioned anything about his past? Any names, operations, locations? He barely speaks, Harwick replied. But something made him add, he knew my brother's name, though. William Harwick, Intelligence Corps. Morrison's face went pale. Your brother was William Harwick from Operation Nightfall? I don't know any operation names. Will disappeared in 44. The colonel studied him for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. Come with me. In the warden's office, Morrison produced a classified file, its pages yellowed with age. What I'm about to show you cannot leave this room, he said. Operation Nightfall was one of our most crucial intelligence missions of the war. A network of agents operating behind enemy lines, saving Allied pilots and gathering vital intelligence. Your brother was part of it. Harwick's hands shook as he read. The operation had saved hundreds of lives, prevented massive casualties by providing intelligence about German positions, and at its head, coordinating everything while maintaining his cover in occupied France, was a man known only by the code name Guardian. We never knew Guardian's real identity, Morrison continued. Even your brother didn't know. But last month we finally decoded a German intelligence file. Guardian was caught in late 44, tortured for months, but never broke. Never gave up a single name. What does this have to do with number 47? Morrison's expression was grave. We believe number 47 might have information about Guardian. You see, several witnesses placed them in the same German prison. That's why his testimony is so carefully guarded. That night, Harwick couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Morrison. He found himself standing outside cell 7, watching number 47 sleep. The old man's face, relaxed in slumber, looked younger somehow. The lines of suffering temporarily smoothed away. On impulse, Harwick unlocked the cell and stepped inside. Number 47's eyes opened immediately, alert despite having appeared deeply asleep. Can't sleep, Thomas? He asked, sitting up slowly. You knew my brother. It wasn't a question. Number 47 was quiet for so long that Harwick thought he wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible, I knew many brave men. Your brother was among the bravest. Were you there when he died? He didn't die. The words hung in the air like a revelation. At least not in 1944. I got him out. Him and 12 others from that German prison. He was badly injured, but alive when I put him on a fishing boat to Sweden. Harwick's legs nearly gave out. He sank onto the small stool in the corner. That's impossible. We were told he was killed in action. He was too injured to continue intelligence work. Sometimes, for security reasons, it's easier to let a man die and start fresh. Last I heard, he was in Australia. New name, new life. Has a farm, I believe. Sheep. You're lying. Number 47 reached under his thin mattress and pulled out a small piece of metal, a military identification tag, worn smooth with age. He handed it to Harwick. It was William's, unmistakably. On the back, scratched in tiny letters, "Saved by Guardian, remember." "How long have you had this?" "Since the day I pulled him from that cell. He insisted I take it, said someone should remember what happened there. I've kept it safe ever since." Harwick's mind raced. "You're him, your guardian." Number 47. Neither confirmed nor denied it, but his silence spoke volumes. "Your brother talked about you constantly," he said instead. "About Emily, his niece. He wanted so desperately to come home, but the intelligence he'd gathered made him too valuable and too vulnerable. One word from him could have exposed dozens of agents still in the field." "But why are you here? If you're a hero, why?" "Heroes are what we call the dead," Number 47 interrupted gently. "The living are more complicated. After the war, certain operations needed to remain secret. Deals were made, stories buried. Someone had to take responsibility for intelligence leaks that threatened to embarrass powerful people. Better a mysterious traitor in prison than the truth about what some officials did for survival during the occupation. You took the fall for someone else. I took the fall for many someones. It was the last mission, you might say, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves anymore." He looked at Harwick with those penetrating blue eyes. "Men like your brother, who deserved their new lives after what they'd sacrificed." Harwick felt tears on his cheeks, shocking himself. He hadn't cried since Normandy. "I've been torturing the man who saved my brother. You've been a man in pain, lashing out at another man in pain," Number 47 corrected gently. "War doesn't end when the shooting stops, Thomas. We all carry our prisons with us. What's your real name?" The old man smiled, the first genuine smile Harwick had seen from him. "Edmund Blackwood. Sir Edmund, actually, though that life feels like it belonged to someone else." Harwick recognized the name immediately. Sir Edmund Blackwood, decorated veteran of the First World War, Member of Parliament, disappeared mysteriously in 1945. The newspapers had speculated everything from defection to suicide. "My God," Harwick breathed, "you gave up everything." "I gave up nothing I hadn't already lost," Edmund replied. "My wife died in the Blitz, my son at El Alamein. What's a title and wealth compared to knowing that hundreds of families weren't destroyed because of work we did? Your brother is alive, Thomas. That's worth any prison." The next morning, Harwick could barely function. He went through the motions of his duties, but his mind kept returning to Cell 7. Every cruelty he'd inflicted, every moment of suffering he'd caused, weighed on him like physical chains. Patterson noticed his distraction. "You all right, sir? You've been off since those military types came around." "Patterson," Harwick said suddenly, "how much do you know about Number 47's case?" The younger guard shrugged. "Just that it's above my clearance. Warden says he's here indefinitely, no visitors, no correspondence. Seemed odd for an old man, but I don't ask questions." That afternoon, Harwick made a decision. He pulled his best writing paper from his desk and penned a letter to Colonel Morrison, requesting an urgent meeting. Within hours, a response came. Morrison would arrive the next day. That evening, Harwick brought Number 47, Edmund, a proper meal from the guard's kitchen. Real meat, fresh bread, vegetables. Edmund looked at it with surprise. "You don't have to do this, Thomas." "Yes, I do." Harwick sat on the stool, watching the old man eat with careful dignity despite his obvious hunger. "I need to know more. About William. About what really happened." Between small bites, Edmund told him stories. How William had infiltrated a German command post to steal crucial plans. How he'd been captured saving 3 downed American pilots. How, even under torture, he'd fed his interrogators false information that led them away from actual resistance cells. "He spoke of you constantly," Edmund said. "Worried about how you'd manage after the war. He knew you'd seen too much, carried too much. He made me promise that if I survived and he didn't, I'd find a way to look after you. And instead you ended up here, and I became your tormentor." "Life has a peculiar sense of humor," Edmund agreed. "But perhaps this is looking after you, in a way. You've had someone to focus your anger on, someone who could take it without breaking, better me than Emily or yourself." The mention of his daughter made Harwick flinch. She's getting worse. The doctors say without treatment in Switzerland, she has maybe a year. Edmund was quiet for a moment. I still have some resources, he said carefully. Hidden away, accounts that certain people don't know about. More than enough for Emily's treatment. I can't take your money, not after what I've done. It's not for you, it's for an innocent child who deserves a chance at life. Let me do this one last good thing, Thomas. Let your brother's sacrifice mean something. Before Harwick could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the prison. A riot had broken out in the main wing. Harwick jumped to his feet, duty overriding everything else. "Lock the cell behind me," he ordered, then paused. "And Edmund, thank you." The riot was brutal. Prisoners who'd been planning for months had fashioned weapons, taken guards hostage. Harwick found himself in the thick of it, trying to protect Patterson, who'd been cornered by 3 inmates with shanks. As he fought them off, one managed to slash across his ribs, sending him to his knees. Through the chaos, he saw a figure moving with purpose through the smoke and violence. Edmund had somehow escaped his cell again and was making his way toward them. Despite his age and frailty, he moved with military precision, using techniques Harwick recognized from commando training. He reached Patterson first, disarming one attacker with a move that spoke of muscle memory even decades couldn't erase. "Get the boy out," Edmund commanded Harwick, his cultured whisper somehow carrying over the noise. "I'll hold them." "You'll be killed! Then I'll die, as I should have in 1944. Go!" But Edmund didn't die. When the reinforcements arrived, they found him standing guard over 2 unconscious attackers, blood streaming from multiple wounds, but still standing at attention. The warden himself came down to survey the damage and stopped short at the sight of the elderly prisoner who'd saved 2 guards' lives. "My God," the warden breathed. "Number 47, you're a bloody hero." Edmund swayed on his feet, and Harwick caught him before he fell. "Just a man doing what needed doing," Edmund whispered, echoing words he'd probably said 100 times during the war. Edmund spent 3 weeks in the infirmary recovering from his injuries. Harwick visited every day, bringing books from his personal collection, newspapers, proper food. The other guards noticed the change but said nothing. Prison had its own code, and a debt of life created bonds that transcended the usual boundaries. Colonel Morrison arrived on a rain-soaked Thursday, accompanied by 2 other officials Harwick didn't recognize. They commandeered the warden's office and summoned Harwick immediately. "We've been monitoring the situation," Morrison began without preamble. "The riot, number 47's actions, your change in behavior toward him, it's accelerated our timeline." "Timeline for what?" One of the other officials, a stern woman with government credentials, spoke up. "Mr. Harwick, what do you know about the Ashford conspiracy?" "Never heard of it. 5 years ago, several high-ranking officials were implicated in selling intelligence to the Soviets. The investigation was buried to prevent a scandal, but someone had to be held accountable. Sir Edmund Blackwood volunteered to take responsibility, knowing his war record would make the conviction politically complicated enough to avoid execution, but serious enough to satisfy those demanding justice." Harwick felt sick. "He's innocent, completely innocent. Of treason, yes," Morrison confirmed. "But he did help dozens of German civilians escape Soviet-controlled territories after the war, using old resistance networks. Technically illegal, but morally, well, that's a different question." "So he rots in prison for saving lives?" "He was supposed to," the woman said coldly. "But your correspondence with Colonel Morrison has complicated matters. You mentioned your brother, Operation Nightfall. There are people who very much don't want those connections examined closely." Morrison pulled out a thick folder. "This is William Harwick's real file. He's alive, as Edmund told you, living in Queensland under the name William Harper. Has a wife, 2 sons. We've kept tabs on him for his protection." Harwick's hands shook as he looked at photographs of his brother, aged but unmistakably William, standing in front of a farmhouse with a family Harwick had never known existed. "Edmund knows where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking," Morrison continued. His knowledge protects dozens of former agents and their families, but now that you know the truth, you're a liability. Unless what? Unless Edmund dies, the woman said bluntly. A tragic accident. The riot provided perfect cover. No one would question it. Harwick stood so fast, his chair toppled backward. You're talking about murdering a hero. We're talking about protecting national security, she replied coolly, and protecting your brother. If Edmund's real identity becomes public, every operation he was involved in gets scrutinized. Every agent he saved becomes a target for Soviet retaliation. There's another option, Morrison interjected, shooting a warning look at his colleague. Edmund could be transferred to a minimum security facility in Scotland. Isolated, comfortable, but still imprisoned, he lives out his days in relative peace. The secrets stay buried. Everyone wins. Everyone except Edmund, Harwick spat. He deserves freedom, recognition, honor. He deserves whatever keeps the most people safe, the woman said. That's what he's always chosen. Why do you think he's never tried to escape permanently? He could have disappeared during the riot. Instead, he saved guards and returned to captivity. That night, Harwick went to Edmund in the infirmary. The old man was awake, staring at the ceiling. They want to transfer you to Scotland, Harwick said without preamble. Minimum security. It's that or an accident, Edmund finished. Yes, I expected as much. Morrison's a good man, but he has pressures from above. We could expose everything. I could go to the newspapers. Edmund turned to look at him, and for the first time, Harwick saw fear in those pale blue eyes, not for himself but for others. And destroy how many lives? Your brother's new family? The families of every agent I worked with? No, Thomas. Some secrets are worth keeping. So you'll just accept exile? I accepted this fate the day I agreed to take the blame. At least in Scotland, I might see the sky properly again. He paused. But there's something else, isn't there? Harwick pulled out a letter that had arrived that morning. It's from Switzerland, the clinic. They can take Emily immediately, but I need to pay up front, £20,000. Edmund smiled. The account number is 471944, Bank of Geneva. The passcode is Nightfall. There's more than enough. Edmund, I can't. You can, and you will. Your brother would never forgive me if I didn't help his niece. Consider it a debt paid forward. The transfer was scheduled for dawn, a grey morning that matched Harwick's mood. He'd spent the night writing 2 letters, one to William in Australia, telling him everything, and one to Emily, to give her when she was older, about the man who saved her life. Edmund stood in the prison courtyard, wearing civilian clothes for the first time in years. They hung loose on his thin frame, but he still carried himself with dignity. The other prisoners had lined up to see him go. Word had spread about his actions during the riot, and even the hardest criminals offered nods of respect. Strange, Edmund murmured to Harwick. I've been here so long. It almost feels like home. It was never home. It was penance you didn't deserve. Morrison approached with the transfer papers. The facility in Scotland is ready. You'll have books, a garden, walks in the countryside. It's not freedom, but it's more than I expected, Edmund finished graciously. As they walked toward the transport van, Patterson came running. Sir, Mr. Harwick, there's been a development. Behind him, the woman from the intelligence service appeared, her face pale. There's been a leak. Documents about Operation Nightfall have surfaced in Moscow. They're demanding Edmund Blackwood be handed over for trial as a war criminal. That's absurd, Harwick exploded. He saved lives. Soviet lives were lost because of intelligence he gathered, she replied tersely. It's political theater, but the pressure is real. Morrison looked grim. If we acknowledge he's Edmund Blackwood, we validate their claims. If we deny it, they'll demand proof of who number 47 really is. Edmund stood quietly through this exchange, then spoke with calm authority. There's a third option. Number 47 dies in prison. Edmund Blackwood remains a mystery, lost to history, and an old man named James Bennett retires to Scotland to tend gardens. The woman studied him. You'd give up your name forever? Your legacy? My legacy, Edmund said, looking at Harwick, is in the lives that continue because of choices made in dark times. William Harwick has a family. His son has a daughter who will live because sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. That's legacy enough. The next hour was a blur of paperwork, new documents, official seals. Edmund Blackwood was erased, replaced by James Bennett, a man with no past worth investigating. As the van prepared to leave, Edmund stopped beside Harwick one last time. Thank you, Thomas. For what? I tortured you. I made your life hell. You gave me purpose. Someone to protect, even if it was from yourself. You gave me a chance to save one more life, Emily's. And you gave me something I didn't think I'd find again. Absolution. Harwick felt tears on his cheeks. Will I ever see you again? Edmund smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his face. Every time you look at Emily, healthy and whole, you'll see what we all fought for, what your brother fought for. That's seeing me at my best. As the van pulled away, Harwick stood in the courtyard until it disappeared from view. Patterson appeared beside him. Who was he really, sir? Harwick thought about the question, about the man who'd endured torture without breaking, who'd saved hundreds of lives, who'd sacrificed his freedom for others' safety, about the prisoner who'd saved his tormentor's life and asked nothing in return. He was nobody, Harwick said finally, and he was everybody who ever chose sacrifice over self. He was the best of us, pretending to be the worst, so the rest of us could live with what we'd done. 6 months later, Harwick received a letter from Scotland. No return address, but inside was a photograph of a garden in full bloom and a simple note. Emily's roses are planted. They bloom red as life itself. Thank your brother for me. J.B. Harwick kept that photo on his desk for the rest of his career. When other guards asked about it, he'd simply say it was from an old friend who taught him about redemption. Emily, recovered and radiant, would grow up to become a doctor, saving lives in ways Edmund would have admired. And somewhere in Scotland, an old man tended his garden, his real name buried with the secrets that protected so many. History would never know Sir Edmund Blackwood's full story, but in the lives he'd saved, in the families that existed because of his choices, his truth lived on. The guard who'd abused him daily had learned the most profound lesson. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who choose to be forgotten, and the strongest prisoners are those who hold the keys to their own cells, but choose to stay for others' freedom. In the end, Thomas Harwick understood that he hadn't been guarding a prisoner at all. He'd been imprisoned himself, by guilt, by rage, by loss. And Edmund Blackwood, number 47, the man who was nobody and everybody, had set him free.